real speakers, real coaches, real investors, real companies. No matter your destiny, all roads lead to Real Leaders Unite.
Thanks, Mike. I would like to start with some gratitude. Thank you, Sandy, for being here.
My pleasure.
And Sandy was like, she agreed to be part of this panel a day ago, yes, 2 days ago?
Yeah.
And it's great. So actually, Sandy and her fund, Empower the Change, we've got a chance to work together because Big Path is helping Empower the Change raise some capital, so we've had a history. I'd also like to say thank you to Real Leaders, and we've had a few experiences of running events ourselves, and so we know the difficulty of really creating the culture and the environment and just the vibe that's here. So I appreciate for Real Leaders for putting this together. And we're going to be talking about capital, but it doesn't have to be dry. I like to think of capital as life energy, tangible life energy. It's kind of how we've decided to that currency that we put it into. And so I think we should treat it in that respect, that it's not an object, but it's literally the manifestation of our life's work and life's energy. So it's an important topic. I think what we're going to start out with is to each give some context of where we're coming from. And so we're going to start out with Sandy, giving her a little bit of her journey around capital and her progression, and just give some context before we dive into the topic.
Well, you guys hearing me okay? And I'm all synced up. Michael, first of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I was glad to be calm enough, which is an unusual occurrence, to say yes. And thanks to Big Path for helping us to raise that $70 million that I talked about, and it's $61.5 million, but I'm eternally hopeful, so I call it 70 on the way to 100. So I came at this work in a very unusual way. There's just no two ways about it. I am a lawyer by education and training and a social scientist, and I actually practice law, and I've done a ton of things. So my dear sister here with the beautiful white curly hair told me to stop talking about being old, but I think it's fabulous to have been on this journey for so long. But the point is I've done a lot of things, and the largest part, and I spent some years as a federal administrative judge. I spent some years in the governor's cabinet in Missouri. But the largest part of my work was 16 years as the president of a comprehensive community development firm called Urban Strategies, and worked all around the country. And in that work, I worked exclusively, it was a not-for-profit, and we worked exclusively with for-profit housing developers. Affordable housing developers, mixed income housing developers, and it was really in that journey. And my firm, our job was to come in and to plan for, and help to implement anything that wasn't housing. Schools, parks, community centers, all of the things that are essential to revitalizing a community. So that is what my firm did. Now, I shared with Michael this morning, it's an interesting platform from which to land where I am today, and it had two components to it. The first was, I came to the firm and I brought my assistant with me, and when I got there were two people. So, and when I left 16 years later, there were 102 people, and the firm was a $12 million business. And for a not-for-profit over 16 years, I've frequently said to people, if that had been a for-profit company, it would have been on the front page of, Forbes magazine or something, to have grown that big, and 4 offices and so forth. So the first thing that got me to this journey is I understand how to grow a business. I'm a businesswoman. And I know what it means to make payroll. I know what it means to be in distressed communities. I know what it means to do all that. And then the other part of it is the reason that I came into that business is because I had a fellow lawyer friend whom I admired deeply and kept asking me to join. He didn't tell me he didn't have any money. But he was a very successful developer around the country, and he said, Sandy, you know what changes things. You know from all the kinds of experiences that I just described to you what transforms things from the bottom up and from the top down. And he was right about that, and I will get into that in, I hope, in some of the discussion. So when I decided that I had done enough and wanted to leave, I think that not-for-profit leaders stay around sometimes a little too long. I hope I'm not offending anybody. And I sort of let out to the universe that I was ready to move on. This whole impact investing came to me around the notion of exactly what my buddy said, who lured me over to urban strategies. I know what changes from the ground up, what it means to go into a distressed community where housing is going to be the platform, where you've got a bunch of developers or a single developer coming in a very complex model, building 400, 500, 600 units of affordable, usually rental housing, and how do you build out everything else that is going to cause that housing to be transformative. That's what my company and the staff that I built, you learn a lot. You know what dollar for dollar is going to change because of investment. And then the other thing is working in government, working in as an adjudicator, I understand top down what changes, what laws change, what things, what executive policy changes, what things. So I have impact investing companies to come and talk to me once the universe kind of learned that I was interested, and I picked the best of the worst, to be quite frank. I wasn't at that point an investment professional. Now my partners get very upset with me if I say that. They're like, you on an investment committee, you decline or not all these deals, you better. So I've learned a lot. But I also was a huge skeptic, extraordinary skeptic. But what I knew from, by that time, 16 and 15, what is that, 31 years? By the time I got to Advantage, 31 years of experience, I knew that the things that I cared about, that I went to law school for, that I worked on, would only be sustainably changed by private capital. That I knew for sure. And so I said yes, and went into Advantage Capital, an odd firm, is to say the least, but I love them to death. As the Chief Impact Officer, the first woman, the first black partner in their 31. At that time, I think they were a 27 or 28-year-old history. And the thing I knew for sure about that is that they were serious. They were serious about wanting to do something different because they could have found somebody that was a lot less experienced than me and shaped them in the way they wanted them to grow. So it's an interesting journey that I think I would leave with saying that the key is to really have a through line. And for me, the through line is what resources does it take to change the things that I care about and that we as impact people care about.
Yep. I want to pick up on that because the through line piece of it, I think that it parallels some of my experience. So we got, Big Path got started in 2007, but my journey kind of started really back in like the early 90s. I was going through business school at the time. I was in Chicago, and you do your summer internship, between your first and second year. And at that point, in that time frame, I think like 80% of my classmates were either going investment banking or management consulting. It was just like this kind of like herd mentality. And at that time, I wanted to do something different and got connected with this bank called Shore Bank. Some of you may know of it. Really, I think it was the bank that became the model for CDFI. Industry. And so did an internship there and got to know they gave you access to the founders, which was pretty amazing. They were amazing, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs in and of their own right. And when I first got there, they're for-profit, deep social justice mission. And when I first got there, I was like, I don't think this is legal what they're doing here. I was like, you can't make these decisions kind of based on something that kind of feels very soft. And you're making, you're supposed to maximize profit. And by the end of that summer, I was like, I found my vocation. I don't care where I am in this, ecosystem, what I'm doing, I just want to be part of this ecosystem. And so planted a seed there. And the through line for me was I couldn't find anything coming out of business school that merged some of these interests and said, okay, I'm just going to get some good experience and then look for a segue. And 13 years in private equity, in my mind, it was like, okay, this is just, you get to a point, you have children, responsibilities. You're like, this is just, it's a dream. It's not gonna come into reality. And the fund I was with, we'd finished deploying our capital. It was early 2007. And I was like, I mentioned with my spouse, I was like, I really want to, this is a good time. And, you know, she was looking at me like, you know, it's one of those times she doesn't have a screen usually, but she had a screen. She's thinking that's the most stupid thing to do. But she said, you should do this. You've been talking about it, do it. And so jump ship, and this was early 07. If it had been late 07, I wouldn't have done it, right? Because it got really, you know, it got dark. I mean, it was already risky, but that'd have been just foolish. And so timing's everything. And so we made it through those tough couple of years. And that was a through line for me was, I think, you know, echoing is like, I think if you, and I think Stedman talked about it, is knowing yourself in the session of that piece of it, that when you're true to yourself, the universe conspires with you. But I think it's also, it's being true to that self that's the secret of having that additional help that's, you know, beyond ourselves. So what we're gonna do today is talk a little about what is impact, talk a little bit about measurement, you know, how do people measure impact, and then, you know, more turn into like, about what does the landscape look like? How do you go find that impact? And looking at it, I know this is covering a lot of territory, but not just the raises, but if you're thinking about an exit, because, you know, obviously there's different issues between raising capital versus exit. So I'm gonna start with like the definition of impact. Sandy, how do you think about impact investing? How do you define it?
I defined it in talking about who I am and how I got here. It is what changes from the ground up and the top down, and setting a realistic group of metrics that evidence that change. I mean, one of the most exasperating, and I keep it just that simple, one of the most exasperating things for me when I finally stepped into this business and, you know, started doing my learning and deep learning and quick learning and fast story. By that time, you know, I had been a lot of stuff. And my adult son, I had this big notebook that I carried around with me everywhere because I was constantly keeping notes and running things off the internet and going into various books to learn a language, because the first thing you must know is the language of your industry, right? I'm in a whole new industry. They didn't know what I was talking about. That was good. But I didn't know what they were talking about. That was not good. And my son said to me, Mom, what in the world are you studying? He's like, girl, you've been, and I said, son, I don't know what these people are talking about, so I have to learn. But what I did know is if you make too complex the definition of the outcome that you seek, you don't have a chance of really getting at it or convincing anyone else to do it also. So I spent some time with a very clear definition that it is what you seek to change from the ground up and from the top down. When I say top down, that's policy, that's public policy, that's banking policy, that's what sits atop the decisions that impact what we want to achieve in the world. And from the ground up, very, very important, because you gotta get to the ground. Everything that we think is impactful is in fact not for the communities that we are serving. You know, I used to go in ahead of housing developers in distressed communities. Any place that's distressed, I've been there, I promise you. I probably know places that are distressed that you don't even know about. But I'd go in ahead of them, and what they thought the community wanted was not frequently what the community wanted at all in housing, and learning to hear from the bottom up, so that at the end of the day, when the housing is developed, the investors are looking at the outcomes, they can really see the transformation that has happened through the eyes of their desires. Did they get the return on their investment? Did they get their tax credits? Did they get so forth? That's top down. But then, did the housing do what it set out to do for the people and the community? If you call yourself an affordable housing developer and you wind up with housing that nobody can afford, I don't care what it looks like, you failed. And if you don't really understand from the ground up what affordability means to low-income people, you can't get it. So what changes? You know, set a set of outcomes, metrics that then roll up to those outcomes, and watch it.
So here's a kind of little nuance. So I heard someone talk about, someone who's pretty experienced in the impact investing world, there's a difference between an impact investor and an investor who makes impact investments.
Yes.
So what was that person talking about? What's the nuance?
I understand that completely. Because an impact investor has, wow, this is weird because it ties to what Stedman said in our session, has a vision that they are seeking to achieve over a period of time and for which they exist to invest. An investor who invests in impact deals is still transactional. They are looking to put their money into a deal and they want some double bottom line impact, maybe triple bottom line impact, but it's transactional, it's deal by deal. It is not what drives the essence of their business like an impact investor. That's
great. I heard it was a panel, it was one of our clients, I think it was if you're familiar with Vital Farms, so it was Matt O'Hare, who's the founder of Vital Farms, and he's had a number of investors over the years, and he got posed the question, what's the difference between an impact investor and a traditional investor? And it was similar. His distinction between traditional and impact was that it's when things got hard that the traditional investor would typically kind of immediately go to cost cutting, traditional things of trying to reduce the loss. Where an impact investor has that longer term vision and can see what, call it the culture or whatever the piece of that business that makes it run. It's not just, there's the mission vision, but there's also an appreciation between the mission vision and the financial engine.
That's right.
That they're tied.
That's right.
So I think there's the impact investor can kind of see that longer term. The traditional investor is just that short term focus, like you said, transactional.
And the impact investor has to structure their business in a way to be able to ride that long wave. One of the things that I said as a not-for-profit leader, because I came to that from the law, I've been a very confused child for a long time. But when I got over to leading the not-for-profit and I started growing the company, and it was small enough, I would be the last interview for people that we hired. And I started realizing that people didn't understand business at all. So I would say, I had a question, do you understand how Urban Strategies makes money? And it was a screening question because every one of the candidates that said to me, it's a not-for-profit, I would say, nope. Can't use you. I don't care how brilliant, I don't care how committed, because no money, no mission. And that is true at an impact investment firm. You've got to structure yourself in a way to be able to ride the long haul, the long road of uncertainty that accompanies true impact investing. You can't be in 18 months, gotta cut employee mode and be a successful long-term impact investor.
So why don't we turn to kind of the measurement of impact? That's obviously a huge topic, but what from at Advantage and Power the Change, how do you think about the measurements of impact?
Well, let me start with a disclaimer. I am not your typical, I'm Chief Impact Officer, I am not your typical impact measurement guru. I respect Jen. I respect all of the rating and ranking agencies, but I also respectfully ignore them. Because one of the things that just blew my mind when I was trying to figure out what were we going to metric and measure at Advantage Capital, and our primary outcome is high wage, high benefit, accessible, that is jobs, and accessible means jobs that people with a high school completion, I didn't say high school degree, I said a high school completion, GED or whatever is the equivalency, can get those jobs. So that's what we really invest to achieve. Now, so then I went to some of the big boys and girls, because I'm a neophyte, trying to understand how does that fit. And there were like 156 definitions of a job. I'm like, for real? Are y'all serious? What am I going to do with this? I can barely get these boys to pay attention to making certain it's a job that is safe and secure. And if I start talking 100, this could be a job, or that could be a job. I'll never get anywhere. So I stepped back from that to say, again, looking from the bottom up, if we invest in businesses to grow businesses in distressed urban and rural communities, which is that's our field, and extrapolate that to Empower the Change. If we're started Empower the Change to invest in Native, Black, and Brown businesses, okay. If that's the goal, to grow them and to grow wealth for them and to close the wealth gap, then what are the things that lead to that? And that's where we built. And now we have, how many do we have? We have 56 points that we measure on our impact matrix. And a few of them, one of them is threshold. You have to answer that one before we can get to anything else. But it is working backwards from what changes on that ground if you grow that business. So it's revenue for the business. It is jobs and wages for its employees. It is engagement by the business in the strengthening of the community. It is wealth creating opportunities for the employees of the business. My former colleague Rachel knows about this kind of stuff. We look to structure deals in a way that entrepreneurs can spend more on wages because they can afford to do it. We look for entrepreneurs who might be interested in flipping to a B Corp so that there is a faster accumulation of wealth for employees. Now, they're not angels. Always it's no mission, no money. But on balance, these are all the kinds of metrics that we look at going into sourcing deals that then are very clear for people to understand, and they're trackable. Last thing, I'm going too long, but you can see I love this stuff. One of the things that we started tracking, and my partners had never thought about it, is wage progression. Okay? They were already tracking starting wage or entry-level wage, skilled-based starting wage, and a number of things that are very, very important. But they weren't looking at the progression year over year, which is the primary reason for wage stagnation, right? As you start high, it's obvious. If you start high, but you never look until 5 years later and the person is only making $2 more an hour. So wage progression, when we started to look at that, caused us to start looking at training and upward mobility inside of the company. So those are the kinds of things that are, for me and for our firm, and increasingly people seem to be drawn to it, very concrete ways of saying whether you're having good impact or not.
So I'm curious, when you went out to do the landscape search of the groups that were out there that were talking about metrics and that were kind of the experts within the industry, what were those sources that you went out to go to benchmark?
Now, why would you do that, Michael?
I'm sorry, you mentioned Jen.
Yeah, Jen was a big one, and then, oh gosh, it's there are the group that looks at CDFIs and their performance, because I found that CDFIs are most like what we were trying to achieve at Advantage Capital. There's a European group that we've looked at a lot. I'll post on LinkedIn good names, but I'm
Great.
not.
I was curious, resource-wise.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we've got about 10 more minutes before we're going to shift to doing some group discussion. And so can you use, is that Zach, not Zach? Mike, can you just kind of flip over to the, here we go. So this is just a schematic thought, and this is more, this is kind of looking at it more, this was a kind of an ag tech related kind of analysis of the field. But so it's always helpful, I think, when you think about impact investing, is it's got some, it's like anything, it's got some geography, it's got some landscape, it's got some contours, and being able to kind of talk about how that's divided up, I think can help you strategize on what to look for. I'm curious, who in the room is kind of like in the next year possibly looking to raise capital? Okay, all right, great. So I think, when you're looking at this, I think one of the first pieces to ask yourself is like when you are reaching out is making sure that you're reaching out to people that are going to have like whatever sector focus you've got, that's checked. The capital size raised, that's checked. The stage of the capital, that's checked. The mission alignment, the vision alignment. So there's just some aspects. If you do some homework on the front end, you can really make yourself a lot more effective in the actual raise. Because if you get a list of, even if it's impact investors, and you haven't kind of done some analysis to make sure there's a fit, you're just going to be wasting your time. And it's also kind of you're gonna get a lot of no's. You might as well take the automatic no's off and not get those to punish yourself. So I would say like starting over to your left, what we'd call like the impact private equity. So these are typically funds that are doing growth equity, growth equity or later stage. So this would be Advantage,
Empower the Change.
Empower the Change. And typically, they can go smaller than 5 million, but that just kind of gives you a sense of the check size. It's going to be typically more than $1 million, and it's going to go on up depending on the size. But someone like, like a Lime Rock, they're doing more clean energy. They're probably 400 million, and their check size is like 10 to say 30. So even if you were stage you fit and the sector focus you fit, if you're only looking for 5. They're not going to come back to you. Then moving over, what we'd call family offices. That term. This is it's basically wealthy families that have decided to bring their investment decisions in-house. In other words, they're going to hire professional investment managers to manage their money, and it could be everything from their public to their private. And typically, we'll find is that unless a family has made a 100% impact pledge, that only a certain sleeve of their capital is directed toward impact. And then part of that will be directed to what we'd call direct investments. So it's just good to kind of think through from their perspective, what might the size of the investment might be in that. And that gives you just some examples of, Builder's Vision. That's the Lucas Walton family office. PSP is the Pritzkers, it's Penny Pritzker. And Grosvenor's is a UK family office that they've got some activity here in the US, but they do a fair amount of impact. And that, those the size range there can be really wide. It could be $500,000, up to, 10 million is kind of what we've seen can be on the higher side unless they really get interested. Then what we'd call the traditional private equity funds or private funds. And these are ones, they might be investing in these sectors, but there might not be the intentionality, and some of their investors, what we call LPs, may not have that double bottom line or triple bottom line expectation. They may just be having a financial expectation, but some of these sectors have a lot of tailwinds, and traditional investors are investing in these sectors as well. Wealth advisors. So, wealth advisors are managing other people's money, and some of those clients of theirs will say, I'm interested in doing some directs. I'm interested in doing some private equity. And so it's just knowing about those wealth management groups. And there's some that have a focus. Align Impact is one. Matthew Weatherly-White's going to be speaking later. Caprock, Arabella. These are ones that have like a specialty. May not be 100%, like Align Impact, 100% impact. Caprock's probably, I think they have about 10 billion under management. About a third of that is earmarked for impact. So they definitely have a specialty. They're well known for that, but it's not 100%. Then foundations. I'm curious, has anybody here raised money from foundations? Great, okay, yeah. So I think it's a really good source. And you can get, You can get what's called a PRI from them. They can invest, you can even, I think another, we got donor advised up there, it's kind of it's a hybrid of that. But yeah, so this is, and here again, it could be a couple $100,000 up to what we've seen, a few million, depending on the fit. Donor advised funds, does anybody raise money from DAFs? All right, that's great. We don't see a lot of that, but I think this is, to me, the sleeping giant in this whole, it's crazy. It's in trillions of dollars. And so DAFs, shorthand for DAFs, they basically think of this as a cheap way to set up a foundation. So people give the money and put it in this, kind of structure. They get a tax break at the time they do it, but it can sit there in perpetuity before it goes out to a nonprofit. And so while it sits there, typically it gets invested. Most of the times it's in public equities. But there's this more and more movement to say, well, why wouldn't, it's like a double bang. Why wouldn't you, put it into an impactful type of investment, and then it has like a double, kind of a leveraged on its impact. And then finally, strategics. I think that's probably usually when you see strategics, depending on the industry, that's kind of when someone's exiting. But this is just a good kind of a segmentation, I think, of the marketplace as you start thinking through your strategy of how to approach these different groups.
Real speakers, real coaches, real investors, real companies. No matter your destiny, all roads lead to Real Leaders Unite.